The Shadow Beneath the Keys. The applause was thunderous, reverberating through the grand concert hall as my sister Evelyn stood to take her bow. Her gown shimmered under the stage lights, her delicate fingers still poised from the final notes of Rachmaninoff. She smiled graciously, soaking in the ovation. To the world, she was a prodigy, a living legend in the making. To me, she was a parasite. Sitting in the third row, hidden behind a sea of proud faces, I clapped mechanically, my palms stinging from the force of pretense. After all, I had paid for the very piano on which she performed, for the lessons with world-renowned instructors, for the endless flights and hotel rooms. It was my money funding her dream. But to the family, Evelyn's success was a shared victory. My contributions? Merely what was expected. No one had asked me if I wanted to be the family bank. It had started innocuously, a small loan here, a favor there. Then, my father suggested I could invest in Evelyn's future. I was fresh out of college, eager to prove myself. They framed it as a noble sacrifice. Her talent is a once-in-a-lifetime gift, and we're all so proud of her. Aren't you proud too, Arthur? Pride. The word felt like bile in my throat now. By the time I realized what I had signed up for, it was too late. My promotions, my late nights, the years I'd spent building my career as a software engineer, all of it funneled into Evelyn's meteoric rise. A new Steinway grand piano? We'll pay you back. An exclusive summer program in Vienna? She needs this, Arthur. A down payment on a chic apartment in Paris to match her burgeoning reputation? It's not just for her, it's for the family legacy. There was no legacy for me, though. My accomplishments were footnotes in the family story, overshadowed by Evelyn's shining narrative. When I tried to protest, I was met with guilt trips. Don't you want to support your sister? Or worse, you'll understand when you have kids of your own. But I wasn't planning to have kids. I wasn't planning much of anything, really. It's hard to dream when your life isn't your own. That night, after the concert, I slipped out of the gala early. Evelyn would be basking in the adoration of fans and critics for hours. My parents would be mingling with patrons, no doubt hinting at the sacrifices they'd made for their daughter's success. The champagne was flowing, the smiles were endless, but I couldn't stomach another minute of it. As I walked back to my apartment, a modest place compared to Evelyn's Parisian loft, I felt a strange mix of rage and despair bubbling under my skin. My life had become a shadow cast by her spotlight. And shadows, I realized, have a way of creeping where light cannot. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer be their silent benefactor, their unacknowledged support system. But cutting them off wouldn't be enough. No, I wanted them to feel the weight of my absence, to understand the depth of what I had given and what they had taken for granted. I began to dig. Family finances, investment records, forgotten secrets whispered at dinners. For years, I had been the invisible force keeping the family afloat. Now I would use that same invisibility to unmake the facade they had built. Evelyn's talent was undeniable, but talent alone doesn't build empires. Money does, and money, as I'd learned, can disappear just as easily as it appears. The question wasn't whether I would take back control. The question was, how far was I willing to go to step out of the shadow? The answer, I realized, as I poured myself a drink and watched the city lights flicker outside my window, was simple. As far as it takes. The Shadow Beneath the Keys, Part 2. The next morning, I called in sick. My boss was surprised. It was rare for me to miss work, but I needed the day, and perhaps many more, to put my plan into motion. Revenge wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand the depth of their betrayal, to feel the cracks forming in their pristine facade. First, I accessed the financial spreadsheets I'd been meticulously keeping for years. Evelyn's career had been built on my dime, and I had the receipts to prove it. Every invoice for her piano, her travel, her designer gowns, it was all there. The family had always counted on my silence, my willingness to support the greater good. They never considered that I might weaponize my knowledge. My first move was subtle. I diverted funds from the family account, the one they assumed was endlessly replenished by me. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Just enough to create inconveniences. Payments bounced. Evelyn's agent called my parents in a panic about a declined hotel reservation. My mother's carefully curated image of wealth began to fracture at the edges. But I didn't stop there. Evelyn's public image was as flawless as her performances. She was the prodigy with a heart of gold, the humble genius who adored her fans. What they didn't know was the arrogance beneath the surface, the way she dismissed people she deemed unworthy of her time. I compiled a dossier, clips of her snapping at assistants, her biting comments about other musicians, even a recording of her scoffing at the idea of performing for free at a charity event. It wasn't hard to find an anonymous blogger in the classical music community willing to publish the exposé. The article spread like wildfire, and while Evelyn's core fans defended her, the whispers had begun. Then came the pièce de résistance. Evelyn's next big performance was at the National Symphony Gala, a televised event that could cement her place as one of the greatest pianists of her generation. My parents had leveraged everything to ensure she got the slot. Connections, favors, even a bribe or two. What they didn't realize was how easily those connections could unravel. Through a contact at the software company where I worked, I managed to acquire access to a critical email server. A few strategically forwarded messages revealed unsavory details about how Evelyn's spot had been secured. It was all anonymous, of course, but the damage was immediate. The Symphony Board launched an investigation. Evelyn's name was quietly removed from the program, replaced by another rising star. The fallout was glorious. My mother sobbed into the phone, begging me to help fix it. My father's voice, usually so commanding, was trembling as he asked if I had any contacts who could smooth things over. And Evelyn? She called once, leaving a single venomous voicemail. How could you let this happen? I thought we were family. Family. The word rang hollow. In the days that followed, I found an odd sense of peace. I hadn't destroyed Evelyn's career, not entirely. She was still talented, still capable of clawing her way back. But I had stripped away the illusions, the entitlement, the belief that my life was hers to exploit. And yet, as I sat in my now paid-off apartment, sipping a glass of wine, I couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Was I finally free? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. When I opened it, Evelyn stood there, her once perfect composure shattered. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." For the first time in years, I saw her not as the untouchable prodigy, but as a flawed, vulnerable human being. And for the first time, I had the power.